In the richest country in the world, millions of people are working harder than ever before. More hours, more effort, more stress. Yet somehow, they're getting poorer. Paychecks are growing slowly, but rent, healthcare, and everyday expenses are rising much faster. So the question is no longer why people aren't working hard enough. The real question is, why does working harder no longer guarantee getting ahead in America? For decades, Americans were told a simple promise: work hard, put in the hours, and life will get better. This belief became deeply embedded in American culture. It shaped how people thought about success, work, and opportunity. Parents told their children that effort would lead to stability. Teachers encouraged students to pursue careers through discipline and education. And for much of the 20th century, this belief appeared to be true. Hard work often translated into real economic progress. A stable job could support a family. Home ownership was within reach for millions of households, and each generation generally expected to live slightly better than the one before it. But something strange has started happening. Millions of Americans today are working longer hours than previous generations, yet many feel poorer than ever before. Paychecks arrive every 2 weeks, but savings accounts remain empty, and financial stress continues to rise. Unexpected expenses, a medical bill, a car repair, or a rent increase can quickly push households into financial instability. Even families with full-time employment often feel like they are living paycheck to paycheck. And this raises a troubling question. If the traditional formula of hard work still exists, why does it seem to produce weaker results than it once did? So the real question is, if Americans are working harder than ever, why are so many getting poorer every year? The answer isn't laziness, and it isn't bad money habits either. The truth lies much deeper, inside the structure of the modern American economy. Because over the past several decades, the relationship between work and financial progress has quietly changed. And understanding that change requires looking at several powerful economic forces. The wage stagnation problem. To understand what's happening, we have to go back several decades. During the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, something remarkable happened in the United States. As the economy grew, worker wages grew alongside it. When productivity increased, workers benefited too. This created what economists call shared prosperity. One salary could often support an entire family. Buying a home was achievable. Saving for retirement was realistic. Many middle-class households experienced steady upward mobility. If a worker spent years building skills and experience, their income typically reflected that progress. But starting in the late 1970s, something changed. The American economy kept growing, but wages stopped keeping up. Productivity continued rising, corporate profits continued rising. But worker pay barely moved. In fact, after adjusting for inflation, many middle-class wages have remained almost flat for decades. This created a major shift in how economic growth was distributed. Businesses became more efficient. Technology improved production. Global markets expanded. Yet the financial benefits increasingly flowed toward corporations and capital owners rather than average workers. So while the economy expanded dramatically, workers were no longer receiving the same share of that growth. And this created the first crack in the system. Americans started needing more work just to maintain the same lifestyle. In many households, two incomes gradually replaced what one income previously provided. Working longer hours became more common, and financial stability slowly became harder to maintain. The cost of living explosion. Now imagine what happens when wages stagnate, but the cost of living keeps rising. This is exactly what the US has experienced. Over the last few decades, the price of essential things has increased dramatically. Housing prices have surged, healthcare costs have exploded, education has become significantly more expensive, and everyday goods have steadily become more costly due to inflation. For example, in many major cities, rent alone now consumes 30 to 50% of a household's income. That leaves far less money for savings or investing. Even basic expenses like groceries, transportation, and insurance are eating a larger share of paychecks. Energy costs fluctuate. Food prices rise with supply chain disruptions. Insurance premiums continue increasing. And medical expenses remain one of the most unpredictable financial risks families face. So even if someone is earning more dollars than before, those dollars simply don't stretch as far anymore. Economists describe this phenomenon as declining purchasing power, which means the real value of income decreases even if the number printed on the paycheck increases, which means working more hours often only keeps people in the same place financially, or sometimes even worse. In many cases, households feel like they are running faster just to remain where they started. The housing trap housing deserves special attention because it has become one of the biggest financial pressures in America. Decades ago, buying a home was considered the cornerstone of middle-class wealth, but today that dream is becoming harder to reach. Home prices have increased far faster than incomes. Mortgage payments have grown, interest rates have risen, and housing supply has struggled to keep up with demand. Population growth in urban areas has intensified competition for housing. Construction costs have increased, and zoning regulations often limit how quickly new homes can be built. For many young Americans, this creates a difficult situation. They must spend years saving for a down payment, while paying high rent at the same time. This double financial burden delays wealth building. And without home ownership, many people miss one of the most powerful wealth-building tools previous generations relied on. Home equity historically allowed families to accumulate long-term financial security. Without access to that asset, building wealth becomes significantly more difficult. Debt has become the new normal. Another major reason Americans feel poor today is the growing dependence on debt. When wages fail to keep up with rising costs, many households turn to borrowing to maintain their lifestyle. Credit cards, student loans, car loans, medical debt. All of these forms of borrowing have expanded dramatically over the past few decades. At first, debt can feel like a solution. It allows people to bridge the gap between income and expenses. But over time, interest payments begin to pile up. And suddenly, a portion of every paycheck goes towards servicing old debt rather than building wealth. Interest compounds, balances grow, and financial flexibility disappears. This creates a cycle where people must continue working harder, just to stay financially afloat. Instead of using income to build future security, many households are simply managing past obligations. The psychological effect. Perhaps the most overlooked impact of this economic shift is psychological. When people feel that their hard work is no longer improving their lives, frustration builds. Many Americans today report feeling financially stuck. They're working full-time jobs, sometimes even multiple jobs, yet still struggling to achieve financial stability. This constant pressure can lead to stress, burnout, and anxiety about the future. And it changes how people think about work, money, and opportunity. Financial insecurity often affects mental health. It shapes life decisions. It influences when people start families, where they live, and how they plan for retirement. For previous generations, hard work often felt like a path upward. Today, for many workers, it can feel more like running on a treadmill. Constant movement, but very little progress. The bigger economic shift. So when we step back and look at the bigger picture, the issue becomes clearer. Americans aren't necessarily working less. In many cases, they're working more. But several powerful forces have reshaped the economy. Wages have stagnated. Living costs have risen. Housing has become harder to afford, and debt has become deeply embedded in daily life. Globalization has changed labor markets. Technology has reshaped industries. And economic growth is no longer distributed the same way it once was. Together, these factors create a system where working harder doesn't always translate into getting ahead. And for millions of households, that reality has slowly redefined what financial stability looks like in modern America. The productivity paradox. Another strange feature of the modern economy is what economists sometimes call the productivity paradox. Over the past several decades, technology has dramatically improved how efficiently work can be done. Computers process information faster. Software automates repetitive tasks. Artificial intelligence assists decision-making. And entire industries have become more productive than ever before. In theory, this level of efficiency should make workers wealthier. If each worker produces more economic value, wages should rise accordingly. But the reality has been more complicated. Much of the productivity growth generated by technology has been captured by companies and shareholders rather than distributed evenly among workers. This doesn't mean technology is harmful. Technology has created enormous economic opportunities, but it has also changed how wealth flows through the economy. A smaller number of companies can now generate massive profits using fewer employees. And when profits grow faster than wages, the gap between productivity and income becomes larger, which means workers may be producing more value than ever, yet receiving a smaller portion of that value in return. The two-income household reality. Another quiet transformation in the American economy is the rise of the two-income household. In the past, many families relied on a single primary earner. One salary was often enough to cover housing, food, healthcare, and education. Today, that model has largely disappeared. In many households, two full-time incomes are now required simply to maintain financial stability. Both partners work, both contribute to household expenses. And yet, even with two salaries, many families still feel financial pressure. Why? Because the cost structure of modern life has changed. Housing is more expensive. Childcare costs can rival mortgage payments. Healthcare premiums continue rising. And education expenses place additional pressure on family budgets. So even though total household income may appear higher than it was decades ago, the financial breathing room is often smaller. Families are working more, but they don't necessarily feel wealthier. The middle-class squeeze. These economic shifts have also reshaped the experience of the American middle class. Historically, the middle class represented financial stability. People in this group could afford homes, raise families, save money, and plan for retirement. But over time, the middle class has faced increasing pressure from two directions. On one side, living costs continue rising. On the other, wage growth remains slow for many professions. This creates what economists call a middle-class squeeze. Income remains relatively stable, but expenses steadily climb. Healthcare costs increase, housing payments grow, education becomes more expensive, and saving for retirement becomes more difficult. As a result, many middle-class households feel financially vulnerable. Even small financial disruptions can create significant stress, which is why surveys consistently show that many Americans feel less financially secure today than previous generations did. The wealth gap. Another major factor shaping modern economic life is the widening wealth gap. Wealth and income are not the same thing. Income refers to money earned from work. Wealth refers to accumulated assets like property, investments, and savings. Over the past several decades, wealth has grown rapidly at the top of the economic ladder. Investments in stocks, real estate, and businesses have generated substantial returns. But households that rely primarily on wages often struggle to accumulate the same level of wealth. This creates an imbalance. When asset prices rise, such as housing or stock markets, those who already own assets benefit significantly. Those who do not own assets often see fewer gains. And because asset ownership is unevenly distributed, economic growth can increase inequality over time. This doesn't mean economic growth is negative, but it does mean the benefits of that growth are not experienced equally across society. The new reality of work. All of these forces together have reshaped what work means in the modern economy. For many Americans today, employment still provides stability, but it no longer guarantees financial progress in the same way it once did. Workers may change jobs more frequently. Some rely on side income or freelance work. Others pursue additional education or training in hopes of improving their financial prospects. The structure of work itself has evolved, and navigating that structure now requires greater financial awareness than ever before. Understanding wages, inflation, debt, and long-term investing has become essential for financial stability. Because the economic environment today is more complex than it was for previous generations. So when people say they're working harder but still falling behind, they're not imagining it. The structure of the modern economy has changed, and understanding those changes is the first step to navigating them. If you found this video useful, consider subscribing for more deep dives into money, work, and the modern economy. And let me know in the comments. What do you think is the biggest reason people feel financially stuck today? Thanks for watching.